Welcome to the deep dive. I'm incredibly thrilled you are joining us today because we are looking at a trajectory that defies, well, it defies almost every conventional rule of sports
hmm
and history for that matter.
Oh, absolutely. It's a completely wild story to trace.
Right. We're talking about someone who started out as a supposedly fragile, quiet kid from a deeply impoverished neighborhood,
Ah,
and somehow he transforms into this absolutely unstoppable athletic force.
and as if dominating his sport wasn't enough, he accidentally becomes the spark for a massive cultural revolution.
Exactly. And the source we are using for our deep dive today is a really comprehensive biographical profile from Wikipedia. We're talking, of course, about the legendary Canadian ice hockey player Maurice Rocket Richard.
The sheer density of his impact when you read through the source material is staggering.
It really is. So our mission today is to dig into the mechanics of that transformation. How does a kid deemed physically unfit for the military rewrite the record books? And why does his legacy echo so far beyond the confines of a hockey rink?
It's a fascinating question.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start at the very beginning, which was, well, it was anything but glamorous. Maurice Richard was born in 1921. He's the oldest of 8 children growing up in the Nouveau Bordeaux neighborhood of Montreal.
And this is right in the teeth of the Great Depression. That context is crucial.
Right. His father, Onissim, lost his job as a railway carpenter in 1930, which obviously plunged the family into severe poverty. We were talking about having to rely on government aid for years just to keep food on the table.
And in that kind of environment of just pure survival, structured elite athletics, simply were not an option.
No, definitely not.
Today, we think of future Hall of Famers entering these hyper-competitive youth leagues by age 4 or 5. Richard didn't even play on an organized hockey team until he was 14 years old.
Which is mind-blowing to consider when you look at his technical skills later on. I mean,
Yeah.
he got his first pair of skates at age 4 and just skated on local rivers or on this little backyard rink his dad put together.
Yeah, he essentially learned the game by playing shinny.
Right?
Right.
Which, for those who don't know, is just informal pickup hockey on the ice with whatever equipment you can scrape together. And he also played this intensely competitive local game called Hog.
Oh, Hog is such a crucial piece of his developmental puzzle.
Tell us about that.
Well, the entire premise of the game was to keep the puck away from everyone else on the ice for as long as humanly possible.
Just totally selfish hockey, basically.
Exactly. There was no passing, no set plays, no coach telling you where to stand. It was pure, relentless puck protection against multiple defenders simultaneously.
And you really see that translate later, right?
Oh, absolutely. When you analyze how he played in his professional career, putting his head down, dashing toward the net, literally fighting through 2 or 3 defensemen at a time, you are seeing the direct result of those unstructured games of Hog on the frozen river.
But the path from that frozen river to the pros was incredibly rocky. I mean, he drops out of school at 16 to work as a machinist alongside his dad just to help support the family.
Right, and then he eventually starts playing in junior leagues, and that is when the severe injuries begin.
Yeah, it was a brutal stretch. He suffers a broken ankle, then a broken wrist, then a broken leg.
Just one after another.
Exactly. Before his career even really takes off, critics and scouts are literally labeling him as too fragile to ever survive the National Hockey League.
And that fragile label wasn't just sports talk either. It had serious real-world implications.
How so?
Well, this was during the Second World War, and Richard actually tried to enlist in the Canadian military twice. Both times he was flatly rejected.
Oh, twice.
Yeah, and during the second attempt, medical examiners took x-rays and discovered that his ankle bones hadn't healed properly from that earlier break. The ankle was permanently deformed.
So the military deemed him entirely unfit for combat.
Exactly.
Wait, so let me get this straight. He is legally deemed medically unfit for the military because his bones are deformed, but he is somehow supposed to compete in the most brutal professional sports league in the world. How does that even work?
What's fascinating here is exactly how Richard solved that mechanical paradox. He was deeply humiliated by the military rejection. But instead of accepting the fragile diagnosis, he channeled that humiliation into a grueling, self-directed training regimen.
Because he had to figure out a way to skate on a bad ankle.
Right. Because his ankle lacked normal flexibility, he couldn't use a standard textbook skating stride. He was forced to adapt. He actually widened his stance and altered his mechanics entirely to compensate for the deformed bone.
And that actually gave him an advantage, right?
It did. That adaptation created a uniquely powerful, explosive skating style that nobody else in the league was using. He literally engineered his greatest physical weakness into the foundation of his legendary speed.
That is the ultimate turning point right there. He shows up to the Montreal Canadiens training camp for the 1943-44 season, finally healthy, incredibly driven, and armed with this explosive new skating stride.
He also secures his iconic jersey number around this time, too.
Yeah, right, the number 9.
Yeah, the famous number 9 sweater wasn't just a random assignment from an equipment manager. He specifically requested number 9 to match the exact birth weight of his newborn daughter.
Huguette, right.
Yes, Huguette, who weighed in at exactly 9 pounds.
I love that. It is such a humanizing detail for a guy who was about to become essentially a demigod in Montreal. And for you listening, there's a very practical takeaway here.
Yeah, for them.
We all face moments where authorities or peers or even medical professionals look at our resume or our background and deem us unfit or too fragile for a specific role. Richard's early career is a masterclass in taking that objective criticism, adapting to your own situational or physical limitations, and fundamentally doing the work to prove the gatekeepers wrong.
That's perfectly said.
So here's where it gets really interesting. Once he is healthy and on the ice, he is just unleashed. The Canadiens put him on the right wing alongside Toe Blake and Elmer Lash.
The famous punchline.
Yes. Together, they create the punchline, which utterly dominates the NHL throughout the 1940s. Early on, people started calling Richard the Comet.
But that didn't stick.
No, it didn't. After a teammate remarked that he went in toward the net like a rocket, the local sports writers ran with it. From then on, he was permanently the Rocket.
And he didn't just live up to the nickname. He completely redefined what offensive production looked like. The 1944-45 season is where his numbers start to look like misprints.
They really do. I want to highlight one specific game to show the listener the level he was operating at. December 28, 1944.
Oh, the Detroit game.
Yeah, the Canadiens are playing the Detroit Red Wings. Richard goes out and scores 5 goals and adds 3 assists.
An 8-point game?
An 8-point game, setting an NHL record that stood for 32 years. But the context makes it legendary. He achieved that record while completely exhausted.
Because of what he was doing before the game.
Right, because he had spent the entire afternoon physically moving his family into a new home.
He was literally hauling heavy furniture up and down stairs all day. And then he just went to the arena and broke the single-game scoring record against elite professional athletes.
It's absurd.
It is. But as staggering as that is, it was just a stepping stone to the real milestone of that season, scoring 50 goals in 50 games.
Right. And to give you a sense of scale, the previous record had been set by Joe Malone 27 years earlier, and that was 44 goals.
So 50 was basically considered impossible.
Exactly. And the rest of the league was terrified of him breaking it, as Richard closed in on 50 opposing coaches, deployed what was essentially a shadow defense.
The physical violence he faced was just extreme.
Yes, slashing, hooking defensemen, literally draping their bodies over his back to drag him down. The defensive pressure was so suffocating that he actually went 8 consecutive games without scoring a single goal down the stretch.
The psychological pressure of that drought must have been agonizing for him.
No kidding.
So it all comes down to the final game of the regular season. March 18 on the road against the Boston Bruins. Richard is sitting at 49 goals.
The tension must have been unbearable.
The game is fiercely contested, the clock is winding down, and the milestone seems to be slipping away. But finally, with just 2 minutes and 15 seconds remaining in the third period, he breaks free and scores.
50 goals in 50 games.
Yes. It was an achievement of such monumental difficulty that it took 36 years for another player, Mike Bossy, to match that exact 50 and 50 mark.
It's a standard of greatness that is almost impossible to comprehend, and the way he played to achieve it was genuinely terrifying for the opposition.
That's a good way to describe it. Terrifying.
Hall of Fame goalie Glenn Hall famously said that when Richard came flying toward the net, his eyes were lit up, flashing and gleaming like a pinball machine. He possessed this relentless, almost frightening intensity.
That intensity is perfectly encapsulated by what hockey historians often call his unconscious goal during the 1952 Stanley Cup semifinals.
Yes. This is a story that sounds like a movie script. It's Game 7 against Boston. Richard is violently checked, falls awkwardly, and strikes his head directly on an opponent's knee.
He is knocked completely unconscious on the ice.
He suffers a massive gash above his eye, gets taken to the clinic, receives stitches, and somehow returns to the bench late in the third period.
Which is crazy.
He is visibly dazed, clearly suffering from a severe concussion. But the game is tied, and his coach sends him back out onto the ice in the final minutes.
And despite being heavily concussed, operating purely on muscle memory and adrenaline, Richard navigates through the defense and scores the game-winning goal to send Montreal to the Stanley Cup Finals.
The immediate aftermath of that goal gives us one of the most iconic photographs in the history of sports. It's taken by Roger St. Jean.
It's an incredible image.
It captures a bloodied, still disoriented Maurice Richard in the locker room, shaking hands with Boston's goaltender Jim Henry. And Henry himself looks absolutely battered, sporting two dark black eyes. And he is captured physically bowing to Richard as they shake hands.
It is the purest visual representation of gladiatorial respect you will ever see.
For sure.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, that gladiator mentality made him a hero to millions, but it also painted a massive target on his back.
Definitely.
Over the next few seasons, the physical toll, the constant targeting by opponents, and his own short temper pushed him to a breaking point. The violence wasn't just contained to the ice anymore. It spilled over and created a profound cultural eruption.
Which brings us to the Richard Riot.
Exactly.
Right. Let's fast forward to the 1954-55 season. Richard is leading the league in scoring, but his physical retaliation against opponents has sparked a bitter running feud with NHL president Clarence Campbell.
Campbell had been aggressively fining Richard Riot.
Yes. At one point, Richard even had to post a $1,000 good behavior bond just to keep playing after he criticized Campbell in a weekly newspaper column.
The tension finally snaps on March 13, 1955. This is during a heated game against Boston. An opposing player, Hal Lako, strikes Richard in the head with his stick drawing blood.
And Richard completely loses his temper.
He viciously retaliates by slashing at Lako's head with his own stick. When linesman Cliff Thompson attempts to restrain him, Richard, in a blind rage, punches the official twice in the face.
It was absolute chaos. Boston police actually tried to arrest Richard in the locker room for assault after the game, but his teammates literally barricaded the door to stop them.
Wow.
2 days later, Clarence Campbell brings down an unprecedented hammer. He suspends Maurice Richard for the remainder of the regular season and the entirety of the upcoming playoffs.
And this is the moment where hockey ends and profound sociopolitical division begins.
Now, we need to make it clear to you listening that we are strictly reporting the historical perspectives documented in our sources regarding these cultural tensions. We are not endorsing or taking a side on the politics here.
Absolutely. We are just looking at how the different groups reacted at the time. And the reactions to the suspension perfectly illustrated the deep cultural fault lines of the era.
How so?
While English-language newspapers across Canada largely praised Campbell's decision, they framed it as a necessary crackdown on an erratic, violent player who thought he was above the law.
But the Francophone press and the public in Quebec viewed it entirely differently. To them, this suspension wasn't about player safety at all. It was viewed as a systemic injustice.
Right.
The prevailing sentiment was that the Anglophone establishment, represented by Campbell, was holding a Francophone hero to an unfair double standard, punishing him far more harshly than English players who committed similar infractions.
And knowing full well how volatile the situation was, Campbell then made a highly provocative decision. Despite massive public outrage and receiving numerous death threats, he arrogantly chose to attend the Canadiens' very next home game at the Montreal Forum.
On March 17, 1955.
Yes.
It was like dropping a match into a powder keg.
Yeah.
Fans immediately start pelting Campbell with vegetables, eggs, and debris.
And then it escalates.
Big time. Someone actually detonates a tear gas bomb inside the arena not far from where Campbell is sitting. The building has to be evacuated.
Yeah.
The game is forfeited to Detroit, and the furious crowd pours out into the streets,
where they merge with a mob of over 20,000 people that had already gathered outside.
It rapidly escalates into a full-blown riot along St. Catherine Street. Store windows are smashed, over 50 businesses are looted, and there's an estimated $100,000 in property damage.
Which equates to well over $1 million today.
Between 65 and 70 people are arrested in the chaos. The violence only stops because Richard himself goes on the radio the next morning in both French and English, begging the public to calm down.
And promising that he would return the next season to win the cup.
The historical legacy of that riot is heavily debated, though. Richard always downplayed his role as a political catalyst. He claimed he didn't know anything about the broader political situation in Quebec. His stance was simply that he played hockey with English boys and didn't see the division.
While his personal stance remained apolitical, journalists and historians interpreted the event quite differently. André Laurendeau, an influential journalist, wrote just days later that the riot betrayed the underlying frustration and long-held passiveness of French Canadians.
It was seen as an awakening.
Exactly. Many modern historians point to the Richard Riot as the crucial spark, the precursor to Quebec's quiet revolution in the 1960s. which was a period of intense socio-political change where Quebec rapidly modernized, secularized, and francophones pushed for greater economic control of their province.
Though it is important to note that author Benoit Melançon strongly disputes that direct connection. He argues that historians applied that political importance retroactively, essentially using the myth of Maurice Richard to serve a modern political narrative rather than reflecting what was actually happening on the ground in 1955.
It's an interesting debate.
It is. But regardless of where you fall in the political debate, Richard had made a very public promise on the radio to his fans, and the next season, he had to deliver.
And deliver he did. The suspension had cost him the scoring title that year, but he returned to the ice with an absolute vengeance.
He didn't just win a cup. He captained an absolute dynasty. He led the Montreal Canadiens to an unprecedented 5 consecutive Stanley Cup championships.
We really have to pause and recognize what 5 consecutive cups actually means in professional sports. It requires an absurd level of sustained excellence and physical endurance.
And along the way, he also became the first player in the history of the NHL to reach 500 career goals.
This raises an important question, though. What happens to a gladiator when there are no more battles left to fight?
That's the tragic part of sports, right?
Always. After securing that 5th consecutive cup, Richard is 39 years old. In 1960, he officially announces his retirement.
His body was just comprehensively battered. He was a man who only knew how to move forward at top speed, and his frame couldn't take it anymore. He had missed massive chunks of his final seasons with a severed Achilles tendon, another broken ankle, and a broken cheekbone.
It's amazing he was still walking.
The game was getting faster, and the Canadiens' general manager actually compelled him to retire because he was terrified Richard was going to suffer a permanent debilitating injury on the ice.
Retiring proved to be incredibly difficult for him psychologically, though. He struggled immensely with the fear of being forgotten.
He briefly accepted a front office job with the Canadiens. Right?
Yes. But he quickly realized it was just an honorary, powerless role designed to sell tickets. He hated it, so he quit, and actually estranged himself from the organization for a long time.
So to stay relevant, and frankly to make a living, he just started hustling. He pitched practically everything you can imagine. Hair dye car batteries, children's toys.
He opened a bar, too, didn't he?
He did. He opened a tavern in Montreal called the 544-9 Tavern, named after his final tally of 544 career goals and his number 9 sweater. He even tried his hand at coaching the Quebec Nordiques in 1972.
How did that go?
Terrible. The stress of being behind the bench was too much, and he abruptly quit after exactly 2 games.
He was desperately searching for a purpose in his post-playing days. But what he didn't fully realize was that his legacy was already permanently cemented. He wasn't just a retired athlete anymore. He had evolved into a foundational piece of Canadian identity.
His cultural footprint is literally everywhere. He was immortalized in Rote Carrier's classic short story, The Hockey Sweater, which is basically required reading for every child in Canada.
The NHL introduced the Maurice Rocket Richard Trophy, which is awarded every year to the league's top goal scorer.
And when he passed away from cancer in 2000, he was given a state funeral. Over 115,000 people came to pay their respects.
That is massive.
And remarkably, the government of Quebec officially named him a historic figure in 2025, cementing his place in the historical record alongside politicians and nation builders.
It really is a testament to the fact that his impact went far beyond the statistics, as incredible as those statistics were. He represented resilience, defiance, and excellence to an entire population.
So what does this all mean for us today? When we look back at the life of Maurice Richard, we see a story about how true greatness is often forged in the fires of extreme hardship. He took Great Depression poverty, devastating physical injuries, and institutional rejection, and he used them as the mechanics to build a legendary career. And sometimes a person who is simply doing their job with an unmatched, terrifying passion accidentally becomes the voice, the symbol, and the catalyst for an entire culture's awakening.
That is a brilliant way to synthesize his journey, and I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to ponder today.
Let's hear it.
Let's look back at his childhood for a moment. Richard developed his unteachable, ferocious puck protection skills and his sheer grit, not in some elite, expensive hockey academy, but by playing unstructured games of hog on frozen rivers until he was 14 years old.
Right. No coaches.
Exactly. When we look at today's hyper-regimented, heavily coached, and incredibly expensive youth sports pipelines, we really have to wonder, are we systemizing the creativity and the raw fight out of the next generation?
Wow, that's a tough question.
If a raw, self-taught, physically physically unconventional kid from Nouveau Bordeaux came along today playing a game he invented on a river, would the modern sports machine even let him become the Rocket?
That is a fascinating question, and exactly why we love digging into the mechanics behind these historical figures. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the extraordinary life of Maurice Richard. We warmly invite you to keep questioning the systems around you, keep looking for the deeper stories behind the legends, and we will see you next time.